Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I went to the Métis Christmas luncheon. Was invited by the president, Peter Lang. So thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. Not only did I meet some really nice ladies, but I learned a new term, sashing. Now, because that involves today's guest, I'm going to let him explain what it is. Time to meet James Cunningham. Welcome to the show, James.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Um, it was a really amazing experience for me getting to go to that Christmas event and be sashed. Just to provide the audience a little bit of context on what sashing kind of is and what it means. So I know we're out here in Chilliwack, so we're on Stalo territory and First Nations territory, and generally when I explain sashing to folks, is I kind of say it's almost the Métis equivalent of being blanketed.
Okay.
So it's kind of like an honoring. It's a welcome home. The sash is also it's also been used as a tool, as a utility. We would use it to tie our capotes closed, our big Hudson's Bay blanket jackets. We would use it to tie off our canoes. We could pull threads from it to use it to tie or repair things if we needed to. But yeah, it's intended as an honoring, and then there's a bunch of different designs depending on family, location, social group,
Mhm.
things like that.
So why were you being sashed that day?
So I had the honor of being sashed by my Auntie Marie Bercier, and a very close person to me who actually we found out I was related to, Carly Hale. I was sashed because just recently I had completed the process of getting my Métis Nation BC citizenship. It was a long process. The level of proof that's required in BC is kind of like a high standard. So it was a lot of work, and it was a grueling process. Now, I think the reason why I was sashed was because of some of the work that I did with Métis Nation BC in my previous practicum. As a former youth in care, I got brought onto their Ministry of Children and Families for a practicum, and we did a lot of good policy work together.
Okay. So like you always knew you were Métis? Because I've met some people that day that hadn't known that they were Métis.
Yeah, so I'd always, like, we talked about it when I was a kid, but my family was very disconnected from the culture.
Okay.
Um, my understanding to this day is that when my grandmother, who was Métis, married her husband, who was white, he was Scottish. Back then, it was a pretty distasteful thing to be Indigenous, so they very much kind of abandoned the Métis culture and went with my grandpa's culture. So a lot of that was lost.
Right. Okay. So now you ended up in the care system, right?
Yes, so. It's a little bit of a unique situation. I always preface it to say it's not the same situation that people expect it to be. I think when people hear youth and care, they think of adoption, foster care, and things like that.
Hmm.
That wasn't my case. When I was 15, I had a living situation where I was living with my dad at the time. We weren't getting along. Things were violent, and it just wasn't working out. And my mom just did not have the space at the time for me to be able to live with her. So I went on to a program with MCFD called the Youth Agreement. And basically, what that is it is a youth can self-advocate to prove to the ministry that they are responsible and independent enough to live on their own, with a little bit of support. So um, I had both parents, they both loved me to death. It just was not working out at that time. And I ended up in the care of the ministry on a youth agreement.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's really unique, isn't it? Like it's not, I'm sure it's not a common event.
No, it's a program that's been around for a while now, and generally my understanding is the way that it works is youth who are already in foster care or
Mhm.
who are already in the system can opt to transition into that when they turn 16.
Okay.
Um, and I think too, I wear a lot of hats, but one of the hats I've really worn is advocacy for former youth in care. And I always think it's important to preface my story because I don't have all of the same experiences of trauma that a lot of youth have.
Right.
And I think I have a lot of privilege because of that. And I think it's important to use that privilege to do advocacy work. So,
Good for you. Yeah, good for you. Okay, so tell me about how that was, what it was like for you at 15. Like this, you were granted that whatever the term you use,
Mhm.
the independence, I guess it is. And how did that work out?
So the way it worked out for me, because yeah, I was 15 when I started the process. And it was a lot of work.
Okay.
Because you don't become eligible for the program until you're 16. So I was at the time I was couch surfing and
Mm,
I was homeless at the time and I remember taking the SkyTrain to different cities so I could walk to meetings and try to advocate on my own behalf and prove to them that I was responsible enough. Um, Eventually I got accepted and I got put on the program. So what that kind of looked like is, or I should say the way it was supposed to look like, is on top of the funding that I got, which I believe was like $650 a month to pay rent.
mhm.
And then it was, I want to say, $82 a week for food and everything else. On top of that, I was supposed to get connected to like a full-time social worker and supports and things like that. But a lot of that, unfortunately, was kind of not addressed.
Right. And that's a common thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But when I'm thinking about who you are today and
Mhm.
like you still advocate for youth?
Yeah, so as a result of some of those experiences and some people in my life who had already worked in the field as well, I'm actually just about to finish completing my fourth year of my social work degree.
Hmm.
As of yesterday, actually, I'm now a peer-reviewed published author. We just did a journal article based on a study tour that we did this last June.
Okay.
And I'm really passionate about my work with Métis people, Métis youth especially. So I can definitely see a career in that field moving forward.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, like I love the like being at the luncheon, the music and the dancing. Like I have a French background, so a lot of that was familiar to me. I'm not Métis, and as far as I know, there's no Métis in my family. I don't, I've never heard of any, but that French part of the Métis is what, it's kind of interesting, right? And then with your last name being Cunningham, my ex, his mother was a Cunningham, and they traced it right back to Scotland. So it's kind of interesting, all of those links
Yeah.
that take you from this culture to this culture. Like it's really fascinating. So you get to meld, I guess you could say, different cultures, right?
Yeah, it's kind of this beautiful thing being Métis because we're not forced into one sect of culture, because like my Métis, my mix, was Plains Saulteaux. I think I'm saying that right. It's basically Plains Ojibwe and French from the
Mhm.
Voyageurs. So we see that a lot in the culture. I mean, even the sash itself is a very European thing.
Yeah.
The capotes that we wore were jackets that have a very European look.
Mhm.
I recall at the luncheon when they were doing the dancing, and one of the dances that they did was the sash dance, where they cross the sashes on the ground in an X and they dance around them. Well, my understanding is that's actually a Highland Scottish thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I
They
was thinking about
cross
the
swords.
swords. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that us Métis people, we naturally get to walk the lines between cultures and really draw from a lot of different ideas and a lot of different traditions and ceremony. Uh, and I think that's also one of the reasons why I've been so open and so appreciative of my First Nations peers out here. I mean, I was born and raised in Squamish, and I've always lived here, and the amount of teachings and knowledge I've gotten from them, and it just feels natural to me to want to pull from the groups that I'm around. So,
Right. Yeah. I'm just trying to think about what's the difference between, like what I don't even know how to word it for sure.
mhm,
Like my auntie was First Nations.
mhm.
She married one of my mother's brothers, okay? But she was always still considered indigenous, like First Nations. She was,
Yep.
why are the Métis a separate people, like a separate identity?
That's a great question. And this is something that I also wondered as I was growing up. So, Métis, obviously, we are recognized as one of the three Indigenous groups in Canada, along with First Nations and Inuit. Now, the reason why we're separated is because, and this is just my understanding,
Mhm.
I'm still early in my cultural journey, but my understanding is that in the Métis homeland, based from the Red River, Manitoba, out east to Alberta and things like that, we kind of made our own distinct culture. And it
Ah,
was a very defined group of people who it was European, whether it was voyageurs or later Scottish people, things like that, mixing and having children, making families with the First Nations women. And the culture that they created is what Métis is. So
okay.
that's why we hear a lot of confusion about, oh, well, this person is mixed European and First Nations. Why aren't they Métis? And
Mhm.
it's because Métis is a very specific thing. It's almost like I would call it saying that because somebody is from Stalo, oh, well, they must be Tsleil-Waututh. It's like, no, they're very separate
Okay.
cultures. So it's really the culture to me, the language, and the land base that kind of defines what Métis is.
Right. Okay. Now, as a person who's just learning
Yeah.
about the Métis, and that was the first event that I've been to see some of the things that are done. How much from the First Nations is brought into your ceremonies, if any?
Mhm. So I can only speak for myself and my own experience. Now, I've been super fortunate actually since I moved to Chilliwack. I got introduced to my elder Marie Bercier, who I now lovingly call Auntie. Um, and she's really started to show me a lot of the culture of Métis, and I start to see um, the connections. Like a lot of the similar medicines I know in the prairies, sweetgrass is big, and that's something that the First Nations and the Métis use. Um, I know I'm really big on smudging. My understanding is that there was smudging out east as well. Um, I think a lot of it comes to the ideals.
Mm-hmm.
So reverence for the land, respect for the land, the way that we would treat our different social groups, the way that we base our lives on relationality. The Métis word for that, which again is Michif, so it's a mix of I believe Cree and French for this particular word is Wakudawin, and that's basically the idea that all the relationships in our lives, all our close people, the love, the relationality is what keeps us well. So if we have Wakudawin, we kind of have these things, which is very similar to a lot of First Nations views as well.
Mm. I think it's really wonderful because I was just thinking about like my ancestors obviously are European,
Mm,
and um, we don't have a culture, you know, like those that stayed within they like married to other Europeans who came here, they lost all whatever culture that they didn't bring them with them. So the French and like you said, the Cree, whatever, when you got together, you brought in a culture,
mhm.
which is really wonderful, I think. Like I've been to a ceremony for a healing ceremony, a First Nations healing ceremony. We have nothing like that as Europeans. We've lost all culture, is my thinking. So I think it's wonderful that you do actually have a culture. I kind of envy that, actually. No, not kind of. I do envy it because it gives you something to unify with each other, right?
Yeah, I've really found both in my Métis culture and the First Nations culture out here, I've found that there seems to be nothing that bonds me to people more than ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Because being out in the West Coast, I know ceremony is really big out here. I've
Right.
done several sweats, and I find that it doesn't matter that it is a traditionally First Nation ceremony. I still feel as connected to my creator and my Métis culture sitting in the ceremony because of the relationships.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I think especially too, I think we've seen over the last couple of decades with acknowledging residential schools and things like that, that there's a lot, there's a lot of Indigenous voices that are finally getting heard.
Yes.
And with that comes a battle to bring back the culture, which is amazing.
I'm good. I'm glad you brought up the residential schools because, like, we know that the government and the church at that time were trying to obliterate the First Nations people. Did that include the Métis?
So it did, yes. Métis people were included in the residential schools. My family, fortunately, to my knowledge, wasn't involved. We kind of had a different point of entry as far as a traumatic relationship with the church. My great grandmother, Rose Ducharme, she was in a orphanage that was ran by the nuns, and it was I don't want to say similar to residential schools because I don't know the kind of trauma, and I don't want to lessen anything or
Yeah.
be passive. But my understanding is it was not a very good place to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Métis people were included in the residential school system.
Well, as a person who was brought up Catholic and went to school with nuns, nobody in my family likes nuns. So, I mean, I'm sure there's some good ones, okay? I'm not saying they were all bad, but we had no, sorry, I could go on a whole tangent about nuns and how we feel about them, considering what they were supposed to be representing. It's just kind of ironic. I'm off the topic, of course, So tell me, like, okay, what is your day-to-day job right now?
Hmm. So right now, I have a position as a peer support worker with Fraser Health's Indigenous Outreach Team. So they're focused on substance use and mental health, primarily substance use, though. As somebody who I had prior experience being in the recovery community as well,
Mhm.
and that experience has kind of allowed me to work in this job where I get to meet people where they're at, specifically Indigenous peoples, and kind of help them with whatever substance use related goals they have, whether it's getting abstinent and going to treatment, or whether it's just cutting down and stopping using a particular substance. It doesn't really matter. So I get to, in my opinion, on the team, I get to do the best job, which is very casual. I get to go have coffees with people, take people to the river, do ceremony. It's a lot more casual than my social worker peers. Um, and it's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just thinking it must put you in a better, almost in a better connection, position to connect
Mm.
with whoever the youth is that you're working with, right?
Yeah, it's become a very helpful life experience,
Mhm.
um, working with these people because I have the lived experience. Like I know what it feels like to be not only to go through addiction, but also to um, feel the stigma around being someone who struggles with substances and how society treats you. And I think that especially with some of the politics that are going on today,
Right.
I think it's a particularly difficult time to be someone who's substance affected.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's face it, people do look down on people like that, like as if that was your dream as a child.
Yeah.
I'm going to grow up and be an addict, right? I mean, yeah, I just think that it could be any one of us. We've just sort of like I was a high school dropout and I didn't see drugs, and then by the time I go back to school years later, it's like it's too late. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That like nobody I knew was doing drugs. We're all working, right? So it's a different world. But when you're in school or whatever, you see it all around you. So easy if you're not feeling good about yourself to get suckered in, isn't
Yeah.
it? But I think I admire anybody who walks away from it because I know I understand addiction, just not drug addiction, but I understand addiction and how easy it is to stay there.
Oh, yeah.
So congratulations for doing that. I think it's
Yeah.
wonderful. I
Thank
mean,
you.
what I just want to say that with all, everything I'm hearing that you're speaking about, you've really come a long way to be a whole person, like from the time you were 15, because I don't know what happened prior to that, to be this person that you wanted to be.
Mhm.
Like it seemed to hit you had that clear vision.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey for sure. I mentioned that I have experience in the recovery community, and I originally got abstinent in 2011, so I was 13 at the time.
Okay.
And I did 8 months in an inpatient rehabilitation program in Westminster. It was quite intense. I've
Wow.
been abstinent since, which is amazing, and I'm super grateful. But yeah, there's been a lot of challenges too. Like in 2015, my dad passed, which was about a year after uh, I had entered into the youth agreement. That became its own healing journey.
Right.
Um, I had to do a lot of work around that, and then even just in the last year, it seems as though I've really started to clarify my life a little bit more and kind of figure out what I want to do.
Yeah.
I have an amazing role model at my university, who I did some of this research with, and who has really inspired me to kind of want to go down that research and policy path.
Right.
I love being a student and I love academia, and I'm all about ideas, and it's almost been a spiritual experience getting connected to culture and also getting excited about ideas in a way that I've never been before. Yeah.
Very good. Well, I think we're out of time, but I just want to first of all, thank you for being here. And
Yeah.
I wish you all well in your upcoming journey, wherever it takes you, right? So just stay on camera for a minute. To the audience, you've been listening to James Cunningham. I really hope people, to everybody out there, like that don't know anything about the Métis culture or any culture around us, get to know the people, because when you do that, you get more understanding and more acceptance, because we should all accept each other as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching the show. I hope you continue to do so. Take care, everybody, and peace out. Let me just find the off switch. So thank you, James. I'm going to air this on Friday around 4 o'clock, and I'll
Perfect.
send you the link at that time, okay?
Amazing.
And if you ever want to be back on the show for any reason, just let me know. I'm happy to have you back on.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. It was really nice to have the opportunity to kind of share a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. So take care. Have a
Yeah,
good
you
day.
too. Bye now.
Bye-bye for now.